a little bit, but if you could both, on the one hand, lay out for us where we stand in the large sense, what we're heading toward, and what possible solution you may be working on for the difficulties.
Okay, the solution, is this on? The solution is to make sure politicians do not destroy the finest military in the history of the world for no good reason. And how do you get a politician's attention? Every bill that we deal with is a jobs bill, our job. So my job is, with your help and others who believe that sequestration is a bridge too far, is to create a political dynamic in 2012 that would make it unacceptable for any member of Congress to cut $600 billion out of the defense budget on top of the $400 billion we're already trying to reduce defense spending by, and to make the argument to the American people that having the smallest Navy since 1915 is probably not a good time to do that. Having an Army at 1940 levels is probably not the right time either. And basically to take Secretary Panetta's statement that you would reduce weapons defense procurement, weapons capability by 23%, you would destroy the industrial base that exists in America to defend America, and to really make a political case that this is unwise. And I would put it this way. You have a bunch of politicians, me included, that were given the task of cutting $1.2 trillion over the next decade as a sort of a down payment on fiscal sanity. And the price to be paid if the politicians failed was to devastate the Department of Defense at a time when we need it the most. So I would argue that we've got this wrong, that instead of firing the men and women who have served us well since 2001 constantly, that the people ought to be fired are us, not the men and women in uniform. I think most people would agree with that. So we're going to have one hell of a political fight. And we're firing the wrong people. So fire us if we can't do the basic things. So Bob, I am very, very confident that we're going to put together a package of $1.2 trillion in cuts across the government, not focused on the Defense Department, and that I would hate to be a member of Congress who went down the road of letting the sequestration happen to the Defense Department, given the environment in which we live in.
So you've got a group that's basically going to solve the problem that the group that was designated to solve it failed to solve.
Yeah, we're going to come up with a proposal, and if you don't like ours, come up with one of your own. But come back to the public and say, we can't get there from here, so we're going to take $600 billion out of the Defense Department on top of the $400 billion, and we understand it guts the military, but we're okay with that. See how well that plays back home.
Well, let's talk about how it plays back home, because if you look at the political campaigns, both on the Republican side, but also the president's political campaign, there's a lot of emphasis on what we need to do at home. We've got serious problems at home. A lot of people, I would say, want to know what we need all this for. We're drawing down in Iraq. We're drawing down in Afghanistan. The Al-Qaeda's on the run, as President Obama is constantly pointing out. So what do we need all this this huge? We spend, you've heard we've spent more than the rest of the world combined, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think the American people are really receptive to this argument at this point?
Well, I think when you tell the American people in terms of the federal budget spent on defense that we're on the historically low side. Let's compare apples to apples. What's been the historic GDP spending on defense since World War II? It's been about 5.5%. Well, we've been ranging between 4 and 5.78 during the Iraq-Afghan conflict. But during World War II, it was 42%. During the Korean conflict, it was 15%. During Vietnam, it was about 10%. So what I would argue to the American people, that the #1 obligation of the federal government is what? To defend us against enemies, foreign and domestic. And if you don't get that part right, you can forget about Social Security and Medicare. And I think most Americans feel like there's real threats. That here's what I would tell you. What happens in Syria, does it matter? You better believe it matters. What if Iraq goes bad? Does that matter? I think it matters. What happens if Iran gets a nuclear weapon? It's the biggest change in our lifetime. Economically and militarily. We'll never have peace as we know it. So we need a military to protect us against real threats. And what I would suggest from a Republican point of view is that we embrace the idea that national security is the #1 priority of the federal government, and we're a nation at risk, unlike any time since World War II, and not be ashamed of it. To say if I'm President of the United States, the first thing I would do is repeal the sequestration. If I'm President of the United States, the first thing I'm going to do in my budget is have a defense capability that is lean, efficient, and will defend us. I will reform the Department of Defense. It is an institution needing reform, that there will no longer be cost-plus contracts. We're not going to do the F-35 again. We're going to get it right. We're going to go for a fixed-price contract. We're going to hold people accountable. We're going to look at our force and make it efficient, and we're going to bring better business practices to the Defense Department. And it's going to be an agency put under the microscope like every other agency, because we're at debt and our whole way of life is at risk from radical Islam and self-imposed financial crisis, and we're going to win both fights. We're going to fix our budget. We're going to go where the real money's at. We spent $1.2 trillion on Iraq and Afghanistan. That doesn't change America's debt situation at all. If Iraq and Afghanistan turn out to be a good outcome, that changes the world substantially. What does it mean to the world to have a democracy between Iran and Syria called Iraq, where Kurds, Sunnis, and Shias can work together and resolve their disputes through the ballot box, through the political process? It is an enormous change in the Mideast. What does it mean to have Afghanistan, a stable, secure nation that rejects the Taliban? It can never be used again to launch an attack. That's priceless. So $1.2 trillion is a good investment if you get the right outcome, and that is transforming the problems we have. And let me just end with this note. My foreign policy view of the 21st century for America is to be smart, to be efficient with our dollars, but to engage the world and not let events overtake us. It is my belief that we should provide capacity to will wherever it exists, the will to live in peace and allow us to economically engage Africa, the ability to have an environment in Africa where the terrorists cannot succeed and the Chinese don't own the whole damn continent while we just fiddle. To get involved with Africa in a productive way to help people who are dying of AIDS, but also to create business opportunity for American businesses. And when it comes to the Arab Spring, embrace it, not consider it an annoyance. Embrace it. Where you find people willing to live peacefully among themselves and never will be a threat to this country, called Libya. There's a possibility for that. We should have a Marshall Plan for the Arab Spring. So your question is, can we afford this foreign policy I'm talking about? My answer is we can't afford not to do it. Because if you allow the world to sink into chaos and the Iranians develop a nuclear weapon, the ability to travel and engage the Mideast is lost, because you'll have a nuclear arms race. No Sunni Arab nation that has the capability is going to leave an Iranian-Persian regime unchecked. And what does that mean for the world? What does it mean for Israel? Absolute chaos. So it's my view that we should be spending money smartly, and if we go to Fortress America, we will pay a heavy price. And if our nominee doesn't talk this way, we're missing a great opportunity, I think, to capture the imagination of the American people who instinctively understand that even though we're broke, we're still at risk.
Well, thank you, Senator. I'm going to come back to...
Strong letter to follow.
I'm going to come back to whether, in fact, we are heading in the direction that you're hoping we're heading in Iraq and Afghanistan in a minute, and talk about the Arab Spring. But just one final question on the budget issue. Are you talking about prospectively more cuts to compensate for the lack of, for not cutting the defense budget? Are you talking about possibly raising taxes? Are you talking about cutting entitlements? I mean, where are the savings going to come from?
Well, on the defense side, we need to achieve a $400 billion saving over the next decade. Everything needs to be on the table. Our force structure needs to be looked at anew, but you need the capability not only to fight asymmetrical war. What if we go into a conflict with Iran? What happens if North Korea goes nuts? So we need the ability. We should learn from this war, unlike other wars, to just make assumptions that one threat is gone forever. So my belief is that you look at the defense budget in terms of, you've got any retired people here? Any retired military folks? Okay, I'm going to be retired in 2 years if I don't get court-martialed. My hope is that I can make it 2 more years. The idea that premiums haven't been adjusted for the retired force since 1989 and it's becoming the largest cost for the Department of Defense budget, has to be addressed. So to anybody who's wondering about whether or not I consider the Defense Department sacrosanct, I don't. We need to look at mandatory spending and discretionary spending, weapons procurement on the defense side, and I'm willing to help save this country from bankruptcy to put the Defense Department under the microscope, and I think the $400 billion over the next decade is a good thing to do. But the truth of the matter is, you could take every dollar from everybody that makes over $1 million, take everything they own, and not change our debt situation. You could eliminate the Department of Defense and not get us out of debt. Why did Willie Sutton rob banks?
I don't remember.
Because that's where the money was at. Now, where's the money at? The money's in entitlements. So to the left, who thinks that you can gut the Defense Department and tax the rich and everybody in America is happy and safe, that's crazy. To the right, who thinks you can't look at the Defense Department and reform it, I don't agree with that either. So if you really want to take the $15 trillion debt and turn it around, reform Social Security and Medicare like Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill did in a bipartisan fashion, and quit this silly talk that you can take the defense budget and basically that's the problems, and the reason we've got debt is because of these two wars. These two wars, all the spending combined, if you took every dollar back, is not going to change the fiscal future of the country. And my question to this body and to the country as a whole, what happens if Iraq and Afghanistan fail? After all this blood and all this treasure, what happens to our ability to persuade moderation to align with us? I believe, Bob, you can't kill your way into safety. I'm glad we killed bin Laden, but that alone does not make us safe. Killing and capturing terrorists has a degree of safety that is limited. The ultimate security that I seek in the 21st century is partnerships. Partnerships between people who will find a place on the planet for myself, the State of Israel, and folks who are different. So providing capacity to will, that takes not only military power, it takes a civilian engagement, and I will now turn to the foreign aid budget. I'm from South Carolina. Anyone ever been to South Carolina? It's a great state. Come spend money. We need the money. Being a Republican talking about foreign aid, for lack of a better term, is about as popular as having a toothache. But I can tell you right now that if we abandon the civilian side of what we can do to shape the world, we will pay a heavy price. The foreign aid budget is less than 1%. I have learned from Iraq and Afghanistan you cannot hold and build successfully without civilian partnerships. The biggest lesson learned from Afghanistan, Iraq, is that the military has limitations, the civilian community has limitations. When they're married up in a campaign plan, the sky is the limit. So when you clear out the Taliban in a village in Afghanistan, how do you hold? You make sure that you have a legal system that the Taliban cannot take advantage of. You make sure there's a way to resolve disputes without the Taliban coming back. You have education opportunities. You have basic economic services, and that takes the civilian component. Civilian mentors from the Department of Justice, having people from the Department of State helping create an economic plan, having people from the Department of Agriculture trying to find a way to grow crops other than poppies. It is a coordinated campaign plan that's paid off. So to my Republican colleagues who think that the foreign aid budget is a waste of money, I think it is the most essential spending we have in terms of security if you believe there should be more options than dropping bombs on people. I will drop a bomb on you if I think it makes us safe. I would prefer not to do that any more than necessary.
Well, on that, again, asking this question again, I mean, when a series of presidential candidates at a debate talked about zeroing out foreign aid or beginning at zero, or whatever phrase they used, those were big applause lines. Those seem to be very popular statements in the Republican electorate. I mean, how are you going to sell foreign aid? Forget about the candidates. What about the average, your South Carolina constituency?
I think Ronald Reagan sold to the average person, blue-collar Democrats, that we're going to win as a nation, that communism's going to fail. How does the Cold War end? We win, they lose. How does this war with radical Islam end? We win, and when I say we, not just Christians and Jewish people in the United States or Muslims in the United States, but all of those in the Mideast who want a better future for their children. Here's the really good news that no one talks about. All things being equal, people in Afghanistan don't want to go back to Taliban rule. The people in Iraq deserve a lot of credit for taking on al-Qaeda in the western part of Iraq and delivering a mighty blow. So the good news for us is that most people in the world, they may be culturally different, we aspire to many of the same things. So what I would tell our Republican candidates for president, put the foreign ops budget under the microscope. Quit writing checks to dictators where the money never gets to the people. Try to make it more efficient. Make sure you're leveraging your money. Tell the Pakistanis that we want to be involved with you, but if you don't help us with the safe havens, we can't give you any more money. Use the money where the money matters as leverage to achieve good results. You take that money off the table, then you have abandoned what little leverage we have in some of these areas. So the idea of zero-based budgeting sounds good. It's a concept that I would embrace in this regard. We should put everything on the table when it comes to the foreign ops budget, but Israel needs to know they're going to get the money every year. And quite frankly, if it not our relationship with the Egyptian military, the things in Egypt would have been a lot worse than they are today. The one reason you didn't have wholesale slaughter in the Egyptian awakening is because the relationship between us and the Egyptian army. So to my Republican colleagues, yes, talk about foreign aid as something that needs to be reformed, but for God's sakes, don't give the illusion to Americans that we can be safe by disengaging. I like Ron Paul, I just don't agree with it. This fortress American isolationist mentality has been there since we've been a people. And the only thing I can tell you, when you look out through history, when bad people roam the globe and they start doing terrible things and good people ignore it, it always gets worse and it always costs more. So I don't want to break every country. I don't want 100,000 troops invading every country we have differences with, but I want capability to maintain the peace. I want our enemies to fear us. Iran should fear us more than they do. And I want our friends to believe in us, that we're not going to leave you in the lurch. If we'll do those two things, that has stood the test of time. So to my Republican colleagues running for president, promise the American people that everything's on the table in terms of spending reform, but don't give the illusion to the American people because we're broke and times are tough that we can disengage and be safe. Simply stated, I embrace the fate of America to lead the free world. I embrace it. I'm proud of it. And if we don't lead, somebody else will.
Well, turning to the Middle East, and you're talking, I would say, somewhat optimistically about where things are going there, but I know there are a lot of people who are not so optimistic after the elections in Egypt, where you have the Muslim Brotherhood with over 40%, and these days we're having to say that's the good news. The bad news is you've got Salafists with over 20%, and you have a Muslim, an Islamist party in substantially in control in Tunisia. You're likely to get Islamist parties every place in the region where you have an election. And I'll turn to Iraq next, where there's reason for concern too, if you read the New York Times front page today. But just talking about the victory of Islamists, is this what we traded in Mubarak for? A lot of people are asking whether that was a good trade.
How this eventually turns out is a work in progress, and the final chapter hasn't been written. Are you afraid of religious people? If you are, you shouldn't be a Republican. Because our party is dominated by religious people. You know, we're a party that where church-going people seem to be attracted to our party. The thing about religion back at home, there are more Baptists than there are people. It's a very conservative state. And every time I go to a function at home, I say, how many of you are Baptists? About 2/3. Presbyterians, a few. Well, you were predestined to be here. And I make jokes about every group. And I said the fact that we all laugh is a possibility one day in the Mideast, but we're not there yet. How did the Islamist parties succeed? You don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure this out. What was the strongest voice? Who was the strongest voice against the corruption of the Mubarak regime? The Islamist parties. Who provided help to people when they couldn't get it from their own government? It doesn't bother me that religious people are playing in politics. What bothers me is if their agenda is that those who disagree have no space. So that is yet to be determined. There are elements in our country, quite frankly, that would turn the federal government into a religious organization. But it's taken us a long time to accept the idea that our strength is diversity. You know, America is a good case study in democracy. We had our own civil war. It started in my state. This is not easy. So the fact that the Islamist parties have gained popular support and represent a plurality in the first free elections doesn't surprise me given the history of these parties regarding the corrupt regimes. What we should be doing is empowering alternatives to the Islamist Party through our assistance and our knowledge of democracy, through NGOs and direct government support. And we should be working with Islamist parties to say, we're not here to tell you how to run your country, but if you want to be part of the free world, don't write a constitution that puts a woman's education at risk. You have your own cultural sensitivities. We want prayer in school as Republicans. Does that mean I want you to be a Baptist? No. We're having these debates at home. So the fact that these debates are going on in the Mideast doesn't scare me. What would scare me is if the elements of the Islamist parties that want to take over the government and write constitutions that would basically create no space for anyone else, that would be a sad ending to the Arab Spring. I don't believe that is the fate of the Arab Spring. I believe that politics over time is going to achieve balance like it has here. It just takes a long time. Right after the fall of the Soviet Union, who won the first round of elections? Former communist. Look what's going on now in Russia. A guy from New Jersey is running against Putin. What a world we live in. Normally, I'd be voting against the guy in New Jersey, but I'm voting for this dude. So the bottom line is look what's happened after the fall of the Soviet Union. It takes a while where strong men come up in Eastern Europe. They're eventually replaced, and so will Putin. Here's the one thing that history tells us, that where there's strong autocratic rule that rewards the few at the expense of the many, it doesn't last. If something emerges that is incredibly intolerant to one set of the population, women, for instance, it doesn't have historical sustainability. What has historical sustainability is the idea that I'll give you something you need if you'll give me something I need, and let's raise our kids so we don't have to worry about unnecessary threats to them. So I am not of the opinion that Islamists receiving a plurality of the vote is the death knell to the Arab Spring. I am of the opinion that what we do can matter. And I don't see a vision, quite frankly, from this president about what the Arab Spring means. I've got one simple rule. This is the first time in 6,000 years that a free and fair election is happening in Egypt, potentially. Let's take advantage of the opportunity.
Moving next door to, almost next door to Iraq. I hope that's not me. It's not.
Okay?
You were talking about how important it is to have a successful Iraq.
That was the Muslim Brotherhood.
Thank you for your kind words, Senator. But there are concerns now in Iraq. There's a front page story in the New York Times about how Mr. Maliki is conducting purges of suspected Baathists. There's concern of increasing authoritarianism creeping into Iraqi society.
Yes.
President Alawi has expressed concern that Sunnis are going to be persecuted.
The Iranians are beginning to dominate the economy of the South.
So you mentioned before that if we had spent all this money on Iraq and it turns out well, then that was money well spent. But what if it is it going to turn out well?
Well, I tell you, the person to blame is the people who fumbled the ball. And this is football season, right? We're going into, whether or not we should have a playoff system is probably would get more attention than anything I'm going to say right now. But the bottom line is that Iraq was not a bad thing inherited by President Obama. It was something about to wind up well. He inherited a very improved situation in Iraq. I think we fumbled inside the 10. I hope I'm wrong. And what do I mean by fumbled inside the 10? The Sunni Shia Kurd coalition is tenuous. What's the biggest political breakthrough yet achieved, that needs to be achieved, that is yet unachieved in Iraq? It's what to do with the oil. The reason I wanted a follow-on force of 10 to 15,000 is it would provide stability at a time when Iraq needs stability economically, militarily, and politically. The biggest friction point that I see is a dispute between the Arabs and the Kurds in the Kirkuk region over oil and boundaries. The hydrocarbon law has never been agreed to. They have budgets where they share the revenue, but there's never been a formal process where people in Iraq can be guaranteed that their segment of Iraq is going to get revenue from the country's riches that is owned by everyone. So having no follow-on force is a strategic blunder in my view. What drives it? I think it's all politics. I think the reason we don't have a follow-on force is not because of the legal immunity argument. I've talked to the Sunni Speaker of the House. The Kurds would have 250,000 Americans if we'd put them over there. So you got two of the three factions that said, yes, we understand the need for American military presence. This spring, I went to Iraq with Senator McCain and Lieberman, and we met with the Prime Minister, and after we left, he said he would entertain a follow-on force if the other parties agreed. And during that meeting, he turned to me when I was talking, my time to ask him questions, said, how many troops do you think we need? I turned to the ambassador and to the general. He said, we haven't come up with that number yet. Austin publicly said that 14 to 20,000. The administration never agreed among itself what kind of offer to present to the Iraqi. The Iraqi military advised their political leaders, we need help in training, we need intelligence gathering, we don't have an air force, we need counterterrorism assistance. All that is gone. Who's the biggest winner of a vacuum? It's the Iranians. And what you see Maliki doing is doing what everybody who is uncertain about the future does. They go back to their corner. So now, without that American leveling presence, I am very much afraid that people are going to go back into their sectarian corners, and the Iranians are going to be the biggest winner of us leaving, and that the Turks are going to have a real problem with the Kurds in the north, and that everything we fought for and sacrificed for could be undone because this administration never seriously wanted a follow-on force. They never put a number on the table, and it has always been seen as Bush's war. And how sad that is, because this effort to change Iraq could be transformative for generations. And if we fail, that will be transformative for generations. I hope I am wrong. I hope that the lack of U.S. presence in any meaningful way will not result into what I've just described, a slow but sure breaking apart of the political coalitions, a corrupting of the economy and the security forces, and a way to pit Iraqi against Iraqi because the stabilizing force that kept this country going was gone. And here's the sad news. You could have done all of this with 10 or 15,000 troops. You could have provided the sovereignty, the CT, the intel gathering, the logistics, the arbitration between the Arab-Kurd border dispute, the Article 140 boundary. There are 5,000 U.S. forces up there now. If they're gone, I just really fear we're going to have a fight up there. You could have done all of what I've just described for 10 or 15,000, and it would have been the best insurance policy this country could have in terms of successful outcome in Iraq. And now we have completely left the place in a lurch. And it's heartbreaking, and I hope I'm wrong.
I'm sure the administration would say that the Iraqi political system made its decision. They're a sovereign nation. We tried, in fact, they do say this, they were a sovereign nation. We tried to create a sovereign nation. They made a sovereign decision. Well,
let's analyze that, if you don't mind, for a bit. You know, I'm a South Carolina lawyer, so take this for what it's worth. Troop presence. Did we ever make an offer to the Iraqis that they could evaluate The answer is no, because the Prime Minister in the spring told me, what do you think we need? I can assure you that the Sunnis wanted American troops to stay in 2012. I can assure you the Kurds did. And I can tell you with a first-hand meeting that Prime Minister Maliki was very open to the idea of a follow-on force. And here's what you need to look at. Where did this 3,000 number come from out of the Pentagon about a month or two ago? Remember when that 3,000 number got floated as what we would have as a follow-on force? And me and McCain and Lieberman said, where did that number come from? Name one military commander that suggested 3,000. What could 3,000 people do? I would argue that this cascading of the number going from 14 to 20 to 3 was an internal fight within the administration, and the decision about Iraq was not made by General Austin or the Department of Defense. It was made by General Axelrod. I think that's exactly what's happened. The President has made a calculation that I can do a news conference with Maliki and celebrate the coming home of all the troops, and I fulfill my campaign promise. I hate to say that, but I believe it, because no military commander has suggested to our Commander-in-Chief it is wise to leave Iraq without a follow-on presence. And here's what I would say to the administration. Your military commanders told you you needed a follow-on presence. 2 of the 3 factions said that we would accept a follow-on presence. One, the third faction, was open to it. You failed. This goes down into failure. The bottom line was Iraq is your responsibility, not Bush's responsibility, and you failed to secure our vital national security interest. And let history say that.
We'll just end on a broader note again, getting back to your original theme. I mean, the argument you make about what America's foreign policy should be is persuasive to some, but as I recall, the Simpson-Bowles committee, when they were looking at the whole issue of foreign policy and defense policy, they didn't spell it out, but they said there really needs to be a rethinking of what the United States' role in the world is going to be. And there are many people who say the Cold War was one thing, you had the Soviet Union, you know, fighting World War II was one thing, but it's a different world now. America is not as strong as it once was, and we need to rethink how we go about looking at the international system and what our foreign policy should be.
Yeah, I think we should rethink what we're doing and why we're doing it, and I think we should learn from history. Here's my view. After September 11th, 2001, we've been in an undeclared state of war. How many people believe that? Okay, with people who don't operate in uniforms, but their ideology is much a threat to our way of life as any other ideology we fought, right? So this war is really a struggle between radical Islam and the rest of the world, and that it is ongoing, and the outcome is not yet certain, but we have a great chance of winning. And here's what I would say to our fellow citizens. Like it or not, NATO defense spending is going to dramatically reduce over the next 10 years. Name one NATO nation, Bob, that's going to spend over 2% of their GDP on defense. That bothers me, and I would like to change that through force of persuasion. But since I'm not a European politician, I can't vote on their defense budgets, but I can vote on ours. And here's the argument I'm making, and I will risk my political career because I think it is so important. That we live in troubled, dangerous times with great opportunities and great risk, and if you try to change the role America has played throughout our history, where we're no longer the leader of the free world, you do so at your own risk. That Afghanistan is a case study in what happens when the free world disengages, the Russians leave, the Taliban take over, and the rest is history. I would argue if the Iranians are ever going to change their behavior, it will be from fear, not a reevaluation of anything else. Not that I now want to be a peaceful nation in the family of nations. And I would argue that it is the United States and the United States alone that has the capability to bring that regime to its knees. If we take that capability off the table now, and the Iranians are able to acquire a nuclear weapon, and we start taking a back seat to world events and not embrace the Arab Spring, which is the biggest change in my lifetime, If we don't forward lean and provide capacity to will to allow people to live in peace with us, then we will lose our economic power, we will lose our standing in the world, and our ability as a nation to survive is very much at stake. So I wish the Republican Party, Bob, would embrace the idea that now is not the time for the Republican Party or the United States to withdraw from the leadership position that we have been given. And I just end with this note, Afghanistan. There's a common theme here. We're leaving Iraq, I think, for political reasons, not based on sound military advice. We're withdrawing troops at a pace not based on sound military advice, but I think has a lot to do with the troops coming home before the next election. The surge forces are coming home at a pace not recommended or an option provided by the military. No one suggested that the surge forces be drawn by next September, withdrawn. What does that mean? That means we can't go into the east. We never had 40,000 troops, we had 30, so you had to engage the South because you didn't have enough troops, and we've done a very good job there. And the game plan was next year, 2012, to go to the Haqqani network and shift the forces to the east. If they're not there, that means that game plan is very much at risk. So I wish the Republican Party would not run away from this dynamic and challenge the President on his foreign policy decisions and say to America that the Obama administration's strategic engagement of the world has been a serious failure. Never has the relationship between the United States and Israel been worse than it is today. Never have I seen, since I've been in Congress, so many people perceive America to be weak at a time when the world needs America to be strong. So to those who believe that we can't afford a robust foreign policy, I hope you're willing to accept the consequences of that. And I hope we'll explain to the country what they are, because I'm sure as hell ready to accept the consequences of engaging the world and winning the struggles of our lifetime. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Senator.